What's poppin' YouTube? It's your boy Optima, back with a brand new video in my first video of the year 2022. It's been a while since I've done this video making things, so while I was away, I hope you all were able to have a Merry Christmas if you happen to celebrate it, as well as a great New Year. I, like most people, decided to have some New Year goals for myself, and the one that I wanted to share with you all is uploading 3 videos per week to YouTube. That's not going to start this week, obviously, with it already being Friday, but I'm hoping that I can start as of next week and just get a good head start possibly this week on it by doing some bulk recording, and then we can just kind of maybe hopefully stay ahead of schedule from there. Any and all encouragement you want to send me in regards to that would really help, as I'm a person who just gets easily discouraged. So all the positivity, the comments, the likes, subscribing if you're new, all that stuff really will help out so that I can reach that 3 video minimum per week for you all, because consistency is so key with YouTube. And I had a lot of different stuff going on as to why I wasn't being consistent. Some things personal, some things regarding the channel, some things that were just unique to the way I was feeling about my content. Lots of different things were going on, but at the end of the day there was also excuses involved, and I don't want excuses to stop me from doing what I enjoy anymore. So all positivity is welcome, and even constructive criticism. I love hearing from you guys. It means the world to me. Just knowing that you're watching and supporting means so much. And if you even want to go further with showing that support of me being more consistent with YouTube, you can also check out the Discord link in the description. You can find me there. I'm always willing to kind of chat it up and talk. And yeah, any support you want to send there would be greatly appreciated as well. Nevertheless, though, thank you as watching as always. And yeah, I guess we could just get into the video. So today I wanted to discuss with you all 26 different deck lists that were recently buffed by patch 3.0 in Legends of Runeterra. This is a perfect video for any of you out there that is just having a little bit of trouble kind of figuring out exactly where you want to spend your time, as far as like, oh, is this the archetype, is this the deck, or should I test this? You may not know. So I thought it would be really good to just kind of throw a bunch of different decks out there. We really feel like we think we know what the best decks already are or what's feeling stronger, but things can just change so rapidly. So I thought we'd go with a wide range of ideas and archetypes and just see where some of these would go. You never know which one's going to interest you, and then see how far you could take it. And yeah, you just have to consider, like, while 26 may seem like a laughably large number of decks to be worth exploring, we just got to keep in mind that we received 8 champion buffs, 1 champion nerf, and 19 changes to followers and spells combined. So yeah, while I wasn't the most enthusiastic about patch 3.0, considering the amount of anticipation that was created around it, I do have to admit that there was still plenty of impactful changes that should shake up the meta that we currently have. Finding exactly which deck is best suited for where the meta shifts to is the hard part, and that is why we have this large number of decks that we're going to be discussing today. But yeah, make sure though, before you get into the video, that you check out the description below for the link to the actual patch notes, because I will be referencing them a lot throughout the video, and I won't be directly saying exactly what the buff or nerf was. So make sure that you just kind of go over those patch notes yourself if you somehow haven't already. But it has only been like 2 days, so it would make sense if you haven't. And yeah, you can also, in the description of the video, find a link to my Mobalytics profile, which is where deck codes for all of these decks can be found. Also, I wanted to quickly address, obviously I did not build all 26 of the decks that we're going to be mentioning as patch 3.0 decks. That would be ridiculous. We haven't even had the patch for 2 full days yet. I did some research on websites like Mobalytics and Runeterra AR and found concepts others were already working on that I found interesting, and are now featuring either their exact list, a slight variation of their list, or some large tweaks to their list if I felt that was necessary. There is obviously still some decks that were made by myself as well, and I will be name dropping some of the creators of the more unique and groundbreaking decks that I actually know who the creator is. So yeah, let's get things rolling. And once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoy these decks we cover. First up is going to be none other than Anivia Control. And Anivia Control, well, Anivia is a unique champion considering how often she is best used as a standalone champ in her decks. Anivia decks are also practically all in on control, which makes for some polarized matchups. Buffing Anivia meant she would easily see increased play, as failure play rates could hardly have gotten any worse prior to the patch. But I'm unsure how long players will stay committed to Anivia. While the Vengeance buff is actually pretty impactful for this deck, the increase in attack and health for Anivia seems mostly irrelevant to me. Anivia decks aren't really focused on keeping her alive, since dying and using Harrowing or Rekindler to revive Anivia back is part of the game plan. Then when attacking, she is often blocked by a unit that is dying to her freezing effect anyways, so making her attack stat irrelevant. We'll have to see how things play out, as I could see Anivia finding some success as a tournament deck, but I'm pretty pessimistic on Anivia. Moving on to our second deck. The buff to Trundle makes him an outright strong champion. This deck focuses on using his new prowess to your advantage alongside Anivia to speed up your game plan offensively. While the synergy between the champs isn't perfect, both thrive in control decks, and Anivia uses a few 9-mana spells that help buff Trundle's attack stat once he's leveled with Overwhelm if you have them in hand. I have never really played Anivia myself, as she requires a playstyle I do not enjoy. So my knowledge on the viability of her decks is pretty minimal, especially going into a new meta. But there's Anivia Trundle. Next up, we have our first Ashe deck. Ashe is by far one of my favorite champions in the game, so seeing her get a buff was a pleasant surprise. Prior to the patch, I had been using Ashe alongside Tahm Kench as a deck to pry on Pantheon and Gangplank Sejuani decks, as both are very champ reliant and lacking in resources for keeping their champs safe, while also struggling to kill Tahm Kench with the backing of Frostbites. Unfortunately, this deck does horribly against Ari Kinnan due to cheap recalls nullifying Tahm Kench's effectiveness, combined with the access of easy chump blocking for Ashe, and then also struggles against Twisted Fate Nami due to how quickly leveled Nami snowballs, while easily drawing mini morph to shut down your Kench at practically any given moment the deck needs to. Now is the time to play this deck, since everyone is busy enjoying the newly buffed cards, but once things shift back, this deck will likely need to be reserved for tournament play only. I believe it has potential though as a tournament deck. The deck is also wildly fun. Next deck on tap is going to be none other than Ashe Harrowing. Both Ashe and Kindred received buffs as well as Vengeance. The buffs these champs received were undeniably impactful. Leveled Ashe finishes games, so her leveling from one less Frostbite than before is big, and everyone had been asking for Kindred to be cheaper than 5 mana since the champ's arrival in Runeterra, to drastically enhance Kindred's ability to impact the game. These two buffs in conjunction with Vengeance makes me feel a little optimistic that this deck can find its way into the meta. Nevertheless though, Harrowing decks just haven't really been doing too much, so I wouldn't get too excited for Harrowing Ashe to come back, but there's a chance. Next up is a favorite of many Ashe LeBlanc Midrange. A LeBlanc bluff would have really pushed this deck to the forefront of the meta. Nevertheless, this deck is for sure better after the simple buff to Ashe's level up condition, on top of the small buff to Rime Tusk Shaman, increasing her health to 4. Together, these buffs now allow Rhymefang Den Mother to be much more threatening stat-wise upon summon. The inclusion of Bandle City as a region in Runeterra caused a sharp decline in Ashe LeBlanc's play rate, as the region is well adept at chump blocking repeatedly or beating you with aggro-based strategies, which are quality counters to Ashe LeBlanc. The time to play this deck is now, as I expect players to eventually revert back to Bandle City decks even after the nerfs to some strong cards within the region. This updated version of the classic deck is from Alwi and focused on countering the current meta more, especially Poro decks. One would hope the buffs to this deck were enough to allow it to stick around even when Bandle City is more popular. Catalogue Regrets has been a bit underplayed since its inclusion in Runeterra. Being able to repeat a spell the following turn is a very strong effect, especially for burn cards, go hard, and even buffed Vengeance. Using this effect properly is the hard part though, and when considering only Vengeance received a buff for this deck, we will likely need better optimization for any catalog deck to truly stick around. Right now it seems like a decent option into the elusive heavy decks running around, and it's possibly worth considering Kindred as an option in place of Sinna now. Now we got our first and only Darius deck with the focus on Overwhelm. Darius received an extra point of health as an unleveled champion and 2 extra points of health once leveled. Darius has needed a buff for some time now, as he was getting completely outshined in Noxus by Sion as a late game finisher. With a nerf to Zion coupled with buffs to Darius and Trundle, there's now enough reason to attempt to bring back Noxus Overwhelm decks. This list is from Italianix, seems like a great starting point for cracking the code here. You can't start bringing back old archetypes and not also buff Nightfall, especially considering how much Nick Mix plays has asked for it. Nightfall is a fan favorite deck considering its time within the game, unique animations, and the fact that Nocturne basically only works within it. The Diana buff was one of the more impactful ones. She now, prior to leveling, gets Challenger anytime a Nightfall card is triggered while she is on board. This should propel her ability to wipe away units through Challenger plus quick attack significantly. However, Diana's best deck just still may not be Nightfall, as she was the only card buff in what's recently been an inconsistent archetype. Well, we will have to see. There was once a time where the brokenness of Targon plus Atrocity was so good that Diana Invokes felt like nearly an S tier deck. That is far from the case now. However, the substantial buff to Diana and Vengeance alongside a bunch of Invokes does not seem bad at all. This deck will likely be held back by its lack of draw power though. Guess we'll see as well. The buff to Iceborn Legacy led my friend Skarzik to immediately call the card getting used on Daring Poro as a strong way to abuse Daring Poro's combination of cheap mana expense in conjunction with the elusive keyword. That is exactly what has transpired, as players are loving filling up their board with nothing but large elusive Poros. Iceborn Poro feels insanely powerful right now, and the community seems torn on whether the deck is overtuned or not. However, we need to see more to have a real idea on how sustainable it is. Having another elusive focused deck to combat Ahri shall be interesting, Elise. There's lots of knee-jerk, I would say, reactions to this deck, and I'm just interested to see where it goes, rather than thinking that it's broken right away. Let's see how sustainable it is. Now we get to discuss one of the most popular decks in the Runeterra streets right now. Well-known, talented, competitive Runeterra player Cephalopod was first to create this deck, and it is already all over the meta. Spiders actually received quite the buff from the boost to Iceborn Legacy, as it is a great way to make the little spiders more threatening. Throw in the buffs to Trundle and Vengeance, and now this is a deck that applies tons of pressure early on, which allows it to curve into the Howling Abyss in an effective way. Iceborn Spiders currently looks like one of the best decks of patch 3.0. Moving along, Fake Hero managed to make a more Kindred focused version of mostly the same Iceborn Spiders deck. With how quickly the Spiders snowball, I can see it being difficult to focus down on removing Kindred too heavily, making the champ a good option for further board control. The Howling Abyss is still used as a late game win condition as well. Here we have our first real Kindred deck for the newly buffed champion. It is so incredible how such a simple change in decreasing the mana cost of a card can make such an enormous difference for a card's viability. At 5 mana, Kindred was basically never going to find itself in aggro decks due to being way too slow and a bit understated. Now, being able to apply tons of board pressure with Kindred's effect on turn 4, coupled with the strength of quick attack, makes the champ a real threat in aggro based decks. This deck was created by Iranian, hopefully I'm saying that right, and at first glance the only card that I'm a bit skeptical of is Electro Harpoon, as I just do not see much discard fodder within the deck. However, dealing 2 mana to a unit and the Nexus sounds very strong alongside Kindred. Kindred Nasus was a champion combination that many tried to make work tirelessly upon the arrival of both champs due to the inherent slay synergy. Most concluded that the deck was just inferior to Nasus Thresh in nearly every way and gave up on Kindred. The buff to Kindred makes this champ duo worth revisiting. Is the deck just a inferior version of Kindred Viego though? Probably. Another take on Go Hard involving Kindred is alongside Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate, wrong one. Kindred plus Go Hard is an obvious synergistic pairing with the recent Kindred buff. This list in particular comes from 4LW, who is already seeing success with the deck prior to the patch using Vi in Kindred slot. The buff to Kindred makes it well worth using instead of Vi. I feel similar about this deck as I do to Catalogue of Regrets, where the concept seems solid, but now it is just about cracking down which 40 cards are the most optimal for the deck's game plan. Another take on Go Hard involving Kindred is alongside Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate Elise Go Hard has been a deck in multiple different metas, but after the buff to Kindred, it seems like a stronger option than Elise. Kindred should do a good job at controlling your opponent's board, which is ultimately more beneficial for this deck. This take on Go Hard comes from Fire First Ace. Kindred Viego appears to be another one of the highlights of patch 3.0. While other decks are still getting discovered, this one has shown to be rather easy to assess as a legitimate meta deck. Viego, even prior to the patch, was a strong champion, but getting his scaling level up conditioning going was just a bit too slow in the meta, and Thresh wasn't applying enough pressure to circumvent that. Turn 4 Kindred seems like a good candidate to give Viego decks the boost they needed. Players appear to be already finding success with these two. Deep is the embodiment of timeless classics that somehow show up in metas you would never expect to see them until you realize the deck is better into the meta than you thought, similar to the way Star Spring is perceived. With a simple but meaningful change to Maokai's effect, a freshly buffed Vengeance at the deck's disposal, there's enough improvement to likely push this deck back into the meta, at least in the right hands. Mill decks are not something commonly seen in Legends of Runeterra, aside from Deep and the Watcher at both of their respective peaks. Players just do not generally lose games through running out of cards, with the Watcher still nerfed out of playability, and buffed Maokai breathes a tiny bit of new life into the Mill archetype. If a Mill deck ends up succeeding, I think this list is near what an optimized version would look like. Turbo level with Maokai to help, with the help of primarily Sea Scarab, then win after playing 2 most wanteds. Simple enough, right? I'm actually, I really like this deck, so I'm curious to see well, I don't really like it because I haven't tested it. I'm very intrigued by this deck, so I'm curious to see if this is something that can actually accomplish something. I distinctly remember the Buried Sun Disc was one of the most insane cards upon reveal. Prior to it, no champion had been able to ascend past level 2 status into level 3. It was a groundbreaking introduction due to that, and due to being a part of the initial Shurima package, on top of featuring a long cinematic rail for the champion level ups, and appearing to be the most impactful landmark yet, which was still kind of a fresher concept, landmarks. Then everyone realized how bad Mono Shurima was, and the deck never really took off much. With the slight buff to Sun Disc to now auto summon from your deck if all cards are from Shurima, this changes a lot in my opinion. This is an all-in build of Mono Shurima focused on having 2 champions down and slamming Ascendance Rise as soon as possible to complete the Sun Disc and ascend all your champions to level 3. Personally, I'm not too fond of this deck since it appears lackluster outside of pulling off that high roll with Ascendance Rise, but there is a little bit other things going on, and also just now your first draw not being wasted on Sun Disc or your first little mana being wasted on Sun Disc is great to see for Mono Shurima decks. This take on Mono Shurima is more along the lines of what I would personally play. This Sun Disc deck feels like it actually has a legitimate synergizing strategy outside of high rolling with Ascendance Rise. Mono Shurima decks are struggling mightily in the early meta, but I believe a more consistent list will appear down the line. The synergy of Xerath and Renekton is there, as Unraveled Earth is great for both champs. I haven't tested this deck yet to know how it feels though. Targon's Peak is another deck similar to Deep and Starspring that everyone undervalues until it's seasonal time and someone does unexpectedly well with it. It is a deck that everyone hates losing to due to it feeling like you were robbed by the high rolls that Targon's Peak allows. I think for that reason, most do not want to believe that the deck can be good. With over 260 games played with the deck and players amassing nearly a 57% win rate with it, maybe it's time we stop seeing Targon's Peak as mostly just a meme. A buff to Trundle and Vengeance means that the typical Fill the Rush deck featuring Trundle and Tryndamere is back, at least conceptually. Typical lists and a deck most should be familiar with, so there's just not much else to say here. Yetis are a familiar archetype that sadly struggle to benefit from the Iceborn Legacy buff, since attempting to hard focus on one particular Yeti doesn't work as well as it does for Poros. As an archetype known for never finding any consistent success, the buff to Trundle makes them a tiny bit more interesting. Trundle works as a huge defensive and offensive unit that helps the Yetis take formation. Especially in this list using Avaros and Outriders, the deck comes from Lover of Pies, and the only change made was removing a flash freeze for a Battle Fury to push for quicker lethal attacks. And the final deck is none other than what's been my favorite deck for some time now, in Xerath alongside Bandle City. Xerath is an incredibly fun champion to play with, and the buff to his health, putting him above 3, excludes tons of cards like Get Excited and even like Buster Shot from removing him with one single use. I truly believe this is one of the strongest Xerath lists. Most noteworthy deck choices are running 3 Unraveled Earths, as the card is essential to Xerath's ability to control games. Furthermore, while the champion splits look weird, I feel confident in it being optimal as well. Talia is monumentally more impactful for the deck than Zilean, in my opinion, as her landmark duplication effect is game changing for stopping attacks with Explosive Minefield, and game winning if you ever get to duplicate a Xerath inside of a stasis statue. She's also very threatening offensively in a deck that desperately needs her to be, in order to not be overly reliant on the arsenal to close out games, because I think that's how you lose games, is relying too heavily on the arsenal. And her drawback is her champ spell, as I believe it is one of the worst in the game. Like, getting a random landmark is really bad. And this is why we drop a Talia and run a one of Sivir. Sivir works as another very strong unit in the mid game that requires multiple answers to remove due to spell shield. She takes tons of pressure off Xerath. Then we all know Sivir into Absolver. Shell game is generally game winning. Expect a long form video analysis video on this deck down the line, because I really love this deck honestly so much. I pretty much have been playing it almost just primarily just this deck and haven't been able to test a ton of much anything else, because I really want to get this concept down for you all and get pretty high on ladder, just so that you guys will take my opinion on the deck and what I've accomplished with it seriously. And you know, those ladder results get people to pay attention. So yeah, if I can get that done, yeah, definitely expect a video on the deck, because yeah, I think it's really strong and I really enjoy it. But yeah, if you watched the video to this point, congratulations. You are truly the best humanity has to offer, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You are one of a kind. But yeah, that wraps up the video though. I hope you all enjoyed, as I know we covered so many different decks, but you can easily revisit any of them by following the link to my Mobalytics profile in the description below. Let's switch over. Yeah, I truly appreciate you all for the support, and yeah, expect more videos soon. But 2022 is all about quantity over quality, so if I feel like I can't get a quality video out, that's when I will make the exception to my 3 minimum video rule per week. But I'm hoping that that circumstance doesn't arise. But nevertheless, if you guys can just dig that quantity over quality, then I hope you guys subscribe up, and I'll see you in the next video. For now, peace out.